All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky. I am your host for tonight's important program. On Standing for Truth, we uphold the truth of biblical creation. We also host some really awesome guests here on the program to assist us in this valuable mission. And it is a privilege, as always, to have my brother here, Sal Giardina. He is back with us tonight to do just that in terms of helping us to accomplish this mission of upholding the truth about creation. Now, specifically, this is part 2 of an ongoing series, a comprehensive series that exposes the deception of evolution's deep time. Now, the focus of part 2 is how the worldwide occurrence of fossils, sand dikes, and folded strata refute billions of years and confirm the global Genesis flood. In other words, tonight, I'm so glad everybody's here because we have a professional geologist who is going to help us confirm the Genesis flood. And I'm excited. Now, this is not Sal's first time here on the Standing for Truth program. Sal has been a tremendous blessing to this ministry and our ongoing efforts. His presentations are always very informative, and I want to encourage everybody here listening and also those who will listen in the future to see the description box of this video where I have links to Sal's website and also a link to where you can find all of his previous programs here on Standing for Truth directly from our website. Now, before I hand it to Sal, I want to give him a formal introduction for anybody who might be unfamiliar with who he is. Sal Giardina has educational and professional background in engineering and applied earth sciences. He has a BS in mechanical engineering and an MS in geology. He is a former registered professional geologist from the state of Arizona, the founder and president of New Creation Ministries, Inc., the author of Switched On Schoolhouse, online interactive 4th through 12th grade science curriculum. He is the author of In the Beginning, God or Dirt. Sal has 8 professional publications in engineering geology. And he is the author / co-author of more than 20 technical reports for industry, private firms, and U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Agency. He is also a professional pilot and scientist, astronaut candidate. He was selected by NASA for 5 days of interviews at LBJ Space Center out of 8,500 candidates. And Sal's programs, as I said earlier, they've been comprehensive. They've been a true blessing. And we've been able to put out clips defending the truth of biblical creation and showing how Sal really has refuted billions of years. And so those have accumulated thousands of views. And I do encourage people to check that out. Now, before I hand it to Sal, I do want to ask a question to those in the audience, especially those who are skeptics and critics. Are you willing to consider that you may have been scammed? Both scripture and science negate the idea that the earth is billions of years old. Judge for yourself as a geologist. Sal Giardina here takes you behind the scenes to expose the dating game of radioisotopes, geology, and paleontology. Sal, my brother, it is great to have you back with us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Donnie. It's a wonderful privilege to be able to address your audience and to bring the truth of God's word. You know, Jesus himself said when he was before Pilate, for this reason, I came into the world to bear witness to the truth. And that is what a lot of your program is about, to bring the truth of God's word to people, regardless of the fact that the world at large has tried to discredit scripture and give people the impression that science is contrary to scripture, which is really a fallacy and a deception. And part of that deception is what we're going to reveal tonight to your audience.
Amen, brother. I appreciate that. I appreciate all the work and time that you put into these technical presentations. Before I hand it to you for your presentation, I want to say hello to everybody in the chat. We've got a lot of our brothers and sisters here, and I can tell that they are just as excited as I am, Sal, for your presentation. Here in the live chat are links. Appreciate it from my moderator here. Links to your website, godordirt.com, and a link to check out your book. After the presentation, to those in the audience, as we like to do, we like to be, excuse me, comprehensive and interactive. Okay, so we want to interact with you guys, both critics and non-critics. And so we will be doing a Q&A immediately following Sal's presentation. That is a Q&A with myself as host. I've had some questions to present Sal for us to engage, and also questions and challenges from you guys. So if you hear something and you want to ask a question, perhaps it's a clarifying question or it's an objection. If you're a critic, send those in, tag me either at Donny or at Standing for Truth. I'll save those and we'll have some fun engaging your comments at the end of Sal's presentation. Sal, I am going to put your slides back up, and whenever you're ready, the floor is all yours. Go ahead.
Okay, good evening. We're going to look at the deception of evolution's deep time. And I want to just take a few minutes to review what we had in our previous program, because this is sort of like a part two to the previous program. Does it even matter about the idea that people are inundated with the false premise that the world is hundreds of billions of years old, and evolution has been continuing since the beginning of time? What would happen to the idea of evolution if the required deep time disappeared? Well, I think that should be obvious, because the entire foundation of Darwinian evolution, in fact, even cosmic evolution, the idea that the world evolved from a big bang, and chemical evolution, and then biologic evolution, it all depends on this misconception of billions of years of Earth history, and that evolution has been going on for an inordinate amount, incomprehensible amount of time. But if we were to show you that the Earth really has not been around for billions of years, and that these premises of deep time were to disappear, then the foundation by which millions of people have been duped and to basically worship at the altar of Darwinian evolution, believing that life could start from non-living chemicals without a plan, without a purpose, without a design, just by accidental combination, which science has already shown is impossible. We're at a point in science today that we know that a random combination of all the elements of the Earth, no matter how much time is available, could not produce the first living cell, and then from there, biologic evolution. And so the altar at which people worship based on deep time, the idea that life could evolve on its own, is the whole premise would completely fall apart. It would have no foundation to stand on. As Donny said tonight, look, we need people watching this to see if you are open-minded. Are you willing to consider that you may have been scammed? I mean, we've all, are subject to being scammed because we're in a computer age. We have to be very careful about that, right? And we have a mass inundation of phishing attacks using our system. Now, you young people out there, you know what these phishing attacks are about. You have to be very careful as to not fall for them. These phishing attacks utilize our education system, fraudulent emails, text messages, phone calls, websites, news media. These attacks are a type of social engineering to try to get you to move your thinking in a certain direction. And you know that if you are caught in these phishing attacks and you don't really think about them and you click on them and receive them, you're going to get malware, right? In this case, instead of malware on your computer, you're going to get malware on your brain, on your thinking, on your worldview. And so we have to really think past this idea, because it is, many people have really literally been scammed by this idea of billions of years of Earth history. We've pointed that out on the last program, which you could go back and review. Both scripture and science negate the idea that the Earth is billions of years old. But you have to judge for yourself as we take you behind the scenes to expose the gating game of radioisotopes, geology, and paleontology. Now, on the last program, we concentrated on this dating game of radioisotopes because people have been duped into believing that there is a method of dating fossils and minerals and events in Earth history using radioisotopes as an absolute indicator of time. But on the last program, we completely, I believe, destroyed that idea and show you how that dating game works. And I urge you to go back and get and review part 1, especially if you have students or children that need to understand why radioisotopes have no really useful foundation. I pointed out on the last program that the world is of the so-called geologic column, the billions of years of Earth history, is founded, the timeline of it, that is the dates of the various periods and eras that is shown on the standard geologic column, are based on the biostratigraphy. That is the idea that the oldest method, it's the oldest method used to date rocks. It's called biostratigraphy, and biostratigraphy matches the sedimentary rock strata layers by the fossils found in them. The fossils are known as zone fossils in Europe. Here we call them index fossils. And the idea that if you find certain particular fossils, they have been pre-assumed and predetermined, so to speak, by the paleontology community and the community of geologists at large, that if you find certain fossils, that will absolutely, that will give you a date as to how old that rock strata is or how old those fossils are. And what I showed on the last program is that all the radioisotope dating go back and must agree with the assumed evolutionary idea of when these fossils have evolved over time. And if the radioisotope date does not agree with the biostratigraphy date given by fossils, then it is not usually published or it is reorganized and redated until they get a date that agrees. So we're back to the dating game. And I pointed out that most scientists do not understand this. I'm constantly told, well, Mr. Giardina, by skeptics, don't you know that the majority of scientists in the world believe the Earth is billions of years old? And as I pointed out in the last program, yes, the majority do. Okay, but most scientists have no understanding, absolutely none, no clue as how the Earth is really dated and how the dating game works in the area of paleontology. They have no idea, and this is what I have pointed out on the last program, that when you submit a sample for radioisotope dating, they ask you right here, what is your expected date? And please provide information regarding why you think you expect the sample to date. If this was an absolute dating system from the atomic mass spectrometer labs, they would have no reason to ask you what is your expected date. But once they go about dating the sample, they compare then the date that you are expecting, that's a date expecting from the biostratigraphic age, that is the evolutionary age that you expect and assume based on Darwinian evolution of life. You compare the age with that from the lab with the expected age, and if it agrees, you publish. If it doesn't agree, you go around the circle again, trying a different sample, different dates, different methods, different isotopic methods. You continue on around, changing it with what I call the dating game. And I gave very specific examples of published dates that have been changed and danced around like this on the last program until they get in the date that agrees with what they expect. So the fossils always win. And the bottom line is all dating starts and ends with the assumption of biologic evolution. So please go back and review that program in order to, if you haven't seen it on the last, it was about a month ago when I gave a previous program. I pointed out that the sedimentary rocks on the Earth, consisting of the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic eras, are divided up into different periods of time. And but prior to these sedimentary rocks, which were laid down by water all over the Earth, all paleontologists basically agree with that, that these rocks contain the fossils of the Earth, and they were laid down by water, and these fossils were buried over nearly everywhere you can walk on the Earth. And prior to that, though, I pointed out that prior to 540 million years ago, which is the base of the Precambrian period, the earliest fossil strata, for the most part, that is fossils that have multiple cells in them. And then below that are the Cambrian rocks, which are mostly igneous and metamorphic rocks that have been subject to high temperatures and pressure. And they're older, and they are, but what I pointed out is the Precambrian time is kind of visually deceptive in these geologic columns, these visual geologic columns, because the Precambrian time goes down to 4.5 billion years, supposedly, and it represents over 80% of all geologic time. In other words, the fossil record is basically laid down within the last 500 million years, 500 million years. But so-called Precambrian rock, which has very little fossils in it at all, is represents about 80% of all geologic time. And the oldest fossils and only fossils basically that they find in it are those that are dated at about 3.2 billion, with a B, billion years old. But as I have pointed out, those single cell cyanobacteria, they're blue-green algae basically that form mats and leave a fossil record of them. They have been analyzed by paleontologists and under microscopes, and these single cell organisms, which are reportedly about 3.2, maybe 3.6 million years old now. That is billion years old. These fossils, these single cell organisms, have not evolved one iota because we find them right now in today at the top of the geologic column. We find them alive and well, and they have had no evolutionary change in them whatsoever. So they're trying to convince you that there has been no evolution for 3.6 billion years old. 3.6 billion years. So these periods, as you see these dates on the standard geologic column, these are the so-called radioisotope dates that so-called very definitively date the age of each of these periods of strata and the fossils within them, and supposedly give you an absolute date, which we showed from the dating game cannot be relied upon whatsoever. So the idea, ladies and gentlemen, that of claiming that 3 billion years of non-evolution is what you call biologic progression. So you're told that Darwinian evolution has progressed from the first single cell organisms at the bottom of the Darwinian phylogenetic tree. You've all probably seen that symbols of those trees, and that the biologic evolution has progressed for over 3 billion years. But the fact is, I pointed out in the last program, there is no evolution whatsoever in the first 3 billion years, 3.5 billion years. There is no evolution. And so trying to say that this is a biologic progression is equivalent to rationalizing, to jamming a square block in a round hole. It just doesn't fit, and it is irrational. So tonight we're going to look at what about that 1/2 billion years of the Phanerozoic rocks. These are the rocks that have been laid down by water all over the earth and contain the multicellular fossils of the earth, starting with the Cambrian period, supposedly, and moving up to current. Is there really a worldwide evidence of catastrophic rapid sedimentation in here? Okay. Can we see evidence? Now, what I'm going to show you tonight is I'm going to take you down the column with a number of examples to show you that everywhere we look, from a standpoint of the fossil record, everywhere we look down in this so-called 500 million years of progression of biologic evolution, everywhere we look in the record, we see that these rocks that contain these fossils have been deposited very rapidly, very rapidly. See, what you're being tried to be convinced in schools and universities, even in grade schools, elementary schools, is that these rocks accumulated slowly over a period of 500 million years. But everywhere we look, we see evidence of catastrophic rapid sedimentation in the rock record. Now, let's just, for a moment, just pause and think about it. what you're told is that below this, all these rock units, such as the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, right? The so-called era of the dinosaurs, the era of the reptiles, or age of the reptiles. You see, you're told, it's dated at around 250 million years old. Okay, this is called the idea historical geology. Okay, that historical geology goes down all the way to 4.5 billion years of Earth history. But how much of this, ladies and gentlemen watching tonight, how much of this, think about this now, is actually history? See, it's called historical geology. Okay, they're trying to convince you of a story of how these fossils came about and evolved over millions of years, but how much of it is actually history? Well, think about it. What is history? History, real history that you study, you go to school, you open up your history book and you study about, your country's history, national history, world history, history of the wars. What is history? It's history is limited to records, eyewitnesses that have recorded records, photographs, documents recorded by human beings, what on a timeline. But the earliest records we have by human beings, human records of any kind whatsoever, only date back about 5,000 years. And even that is a stretch. But if you want to study archaeology and become an archaeology individual, you're limited to about 5,000 years of Earth history that is actually could be recorded and written. Things that we have petroglyphs and things written by different languages on rocks and such like this. So history, real records, recorded history only goes back about 5,000 years. And the first period, called the Holocene, ends at 10,000 years. So history, if you want to be an archaeologist, you're only studying this part of the geologic column right here. See, about 5,000 years from the surface on down, from current mankind back down. If you want to major in history, then you're about halfway through the first Holocene period. And after that, you're talking about prehistory. Okay. Now I want you to understand prehistory, called prehistoric, right? How many times have you heard that the dinosaurs are prehistoric? Okay. The Ice Age is prehistoric. Okay, the first Cambrian multicellular fossils that we find down here in the rock record are 400 to 500 million years old. That's prehistoric. What do they mean that? That means it's prior to history, right? Okay, but if there's no records of it, then anything from this point on down that they're trying to convince you on the age of the Earth is neither history or science, because there are no records anywhere on the Earth older than about 5,000 years up in here. Okay. So anything prior to that is called prehistoric. What does that mean? There's no records. It's just based on assumptions. Well, is it based on science? No, it's not based on science, because science, the real science, using the scientific method, which you may have learned at school, requires you to have something that you can measure and reproduce in a laboratory, experiment with, and reproduce it and measure it. And nothing that is prehistoric can be put in a lab and measured and reproduced. Nothing at all. You can't reproduce the dinosaurs. You can't reproduce the so-called biologic evolution in a laboratory. It's beyond the scientific method. So everything below this point that you're being told about the Earth is based is prehistoric, and it is either history or science. So if it is neither history or science, then what is it? Well, then it's a matter of faith. You have to believe it. You have to weigh the facts. Okay. Just like the crime scene investigations. You watch TV and you got, New Orleans CSI, you have New York CSI, Miami crime scene investigation. None of those investigations can reproduce the actual perpetrator or the actual event that they're trying to uncover, right? You can't go back in history and time and reproduce it in the lab. So they present to you what they have is evidence. Now, some of it is scientific evidence, but you have to weigh it. So it's a matter of faith. You have to weigh the evidence, and we're going to show you some of that evidence tonight as to why this entire column was formed rapidly, contrary to popular opinion, forming slowly over millions of years. You have to weigh the evidence for yourself, and when you have to weigh things and understand that they are a matter of faith, but you do have an intelligence to be able to weigh the evidence, then it's basically a religion or a philosophy. And we contend that biologic evolution, especially Darwinian evolution, chemical evolution, it's a matter of faith, which comes under more of a philosophy or a religious belief. I showed you in the last program that the scripture, though, which is deposited in the earth, God deposited in this earth a scripture which he has promised to keep and from being distorted. Now, the Bible, which is scripture, people have tried to destroy it, discredit, redact it for thousands of years, but they have never been able to eradicate it. We still have scripture in a very accurate form. This has been shown over and over again because God made this deposit of scripture. It's called the Word of God, and it gives us 40 centuries of revelation of a timeline from creation to Christ, the birth of Christ, over a period of 40 centuries. I pointed this out in the last program, how detailed this is. I've expanded this chart for you and showed you that many scholars have worked on this over the decades and centuries, and have worked out the timeline that has been revealed to us in the Bible. Why did God do that? Because he shed light on the actual age of the earth. We know the age of the earth. We don't have to rely on biostratigraphy or the assumption of evolutionary age of the fossils and the things that we want to date. He has given us a timeline of Earth history from creation to Christ. And of course, we know we're about 2,000 years down the line from the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so therefore, the Earth timeline of Earth history is about 6,000 years. If you want to know a little bit more about this, you could refer back to the previous program. So Proverbs 18:17 says that, everything sounds good until you hear the other side of the story. And tonight you're getting the other side of the story to some extent for you to weigh. And we'll give you the scientific evidence, but it's you have to weigh it for yourself and put the pieces together. We're going to look at the existence of fossils tonight, and what's called sandpipes and dikes, and some folded strata. So this is from the fossil record. We'll look at some of the evidence from geology. And on the next program, we'll go into geology a little bit more, what was called unconformities. This is the area where the evolutionary geologists hide the millions of years of Earth history. We show you where they hide that in the geologic column and why it is a deception. That would be on the next program. Make sure you tune in. We'll show you that the soft organic tissue that is preserved in throughout the fossil record now is a completely upsetting the idea that these fossils are dated in the hundreds of millions of years. But tonight we're going to look at these two areas of the fossil record and geology. So as we proceed tonight, I want you to understand that this deception that people have been brought on the human race, it's a deception that people think that evolution has been going on. People have evolved from chemicals over millions of years. And the sinister message of this is this. I mean, and the kids get it. The students get it. I mean, it's an unspoken message in the classroom, starting in the early grades, right up to the university level, and even postgraduate students. I bought into a lot of this even as a graduate geology student studying for a master's degree. But the big picture consists of a sinister overriding agenda of deception, not just deception in this area, of biologic evolution, but the idea is if you fall for this deception, then the idea is, well, if life could start from chemicals without plan, purpose, or design, which science has already shown is not possible, but because it is so deceptive and is so widespread, if you fall for that, then the idea is that the underlying message in your psyche, in your soul, is that who needs God? If life could start and progress just on the random chemicals and actions, then who needs God to create life? You see, so there is a sinister underlying message here. And so as you watch this program, I want you to realize that if you could be deceived into thinking the Earth is billions of years old, what else have you been deceived about? The world is full of influencers. Now, you younger people know what social media influencers are, right? These are people, high-profile people, celebrities, movie stars, people that are in sports, etc., that have thousands and thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of followers, and they influence people, okay? But I want you to know that we're engaged in spiritual warfare for the control of humanity. And if you don't get out from under this deception, there are hordes of demonic influences that are out there that have influenced people to propagate all these deceptive ideas in order to try to negate the scripture and bring you into a relationship with the Creator, which is Jesus Christ, who wants to have a relationship with you. So there is an overarching deception that goes beyond this program. But if you can consider that perhaps you've been deceived, okay, and scammed to an extent, you might want to widen your ideas into where else have I possibly been deceived? And so you have to put the pieces together, because there is an overarching strategy that is out there. It is real, and it's a staging system for a one world government to reset the whole society into a one world government. So let's go on with what we have for tonight. Fossils. Fossils require a unique preservation, okay? The fact that any fossil exists in the rock strata at all, ladies and gentlemen, of the Earth is inconsistent with evolutionary deep time and uniformitarianism, the idea that everything, all the natural processes of the earth that we see today, which appear to be very, very slow, have been in existence for immortal, for time immemorial. This idea of uniformitarianism, a slow processes, has been disputed and shown to be false many times by creation geologists. So much so that many geologists now are actually abandoning uniformitarianism, strict uniformitarianism, and acknowledging that when we look at the fossil record, these are secular scientists, secular geologists, and paleontologists all over the world now basically acknowledge that the what they see in the rock record are many, many, many catastrophic processes, rapid processes that have acted in the rock record over, but they claim over millions of years. That between these catastrophes and rapid inundation of the organisms throughout the geologic column, that between these catastrophes, see, they must admit that they see catastrophes in the column because we've been pointing that out to them for decades now. It's indisputable, like we're going to show you tonight. But that between these catastrophes, which they now admit, are eons and eons of times, and we'll take that up on the next program. So fossils, why aren't they forming today? Okay, because they require conditions of preservation of rapid burial. I mean, everybody admits that now. Even secular paleontologists have come to admit that when an organism dies, it has to be isolated from the scavengers, which make quick work of them all over the earth. You have to limit the bacterial decay by burying them deep enough. You have to inhibit the oxidation and chemical breakdown of the creatures. And then, of course, on top of all of that, you have the irreversible molecular entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics, which is irreversible, and it affects everything on the earth. Particularly organic matter and inorganic matter, both, causing everything to break down into simpler molecules and elements over time. So there is a worldwide lack of fossils in the current oceans and in on the continental surfaces. You know that during our history of the United States here, there was a time where people in the early stages of our country's history, where there were buffaloes were slaughtered by the thousands. I think it's in the hundreds of thousands all over the Western United States and maybe Central United States and many areas of the country. Countless numbers of bison were slaughtered and their carcasses just left basically to disintegrate. But we don't find them as fossils. It's extremely rare to find a fossil of a bison anywhere because of these conditions. As I pointed out, you need a special rapid burial conditions to form a fossil. And today, paleontologists and various scientists have actually tried to fossilize various organisms to make a fossil, so to speak. And they found that it is extremely difficult. They've only had really very marginal successes, even from using the laboratories and everything they know to try to so-called make a fossil. It is a very difficult thing to do. They have had some very, very limited success in certain conditions, but it is a very difficult thing to do. In fact, scientists have made many attempts to fossilize various organisms, but very limited success. Now, as you look around, here's the reality. As you look around the oceans today, you look at these, underwater videos that we have. Okay, where are the millions and millions of dead animals lying on the bottom, waiting to be slowly, right? Think uniformitarianism, very slowly over time being buried and forming into a fossil. No, doesn't happen. As we said, the scavengers get at it, the oxidation. That they've done experiments where these various marine organisms fall apart and disarticulate very, very rapidly. Even if they prevent the scavengers from getting at them by putting them in a cage, they disarticulate and disintegrate in a matter of just a few days to a few weeks. And that's why we don't see fossils all over the earth. They just not hardly forming anywhere today. James Cameron, who directed the movie Titanic, he has explored this Titanic site multiple times and said he's never seen human remains. We've seen shoes, we've seen pairs of shoes right here, which would strongly suggest there was a body there at one point, but we never see any human remains. As I said, we don't see human fossils hardly anywhere preserved because it takes extraordinary, catastrophic burial conditions, as we pointed out, unique conditions to form fossils. And we'll show you some examples of this. This is an ichthyosaur. This is what's called a marine reptile, it is believed to be. It is a rather large marine reptile. And here we have a famous fossil having almost completed giving birth to a live infant. The beak of the young reptile is still inside the mother's birth canal. Here is the infant during the process of birth, partially still inside. In other words, this is a flash. Okay, this is a freeze of the fossil in time. This animal was buried so rapidly that the mother couldn't even complete the birth process. And we have a number of these around the world have been found. A lower Cretaceous, which now we're getting down into the 120, 140 million year range of ichthyosaurs, the same type of a marine reptile in deep marine slope channel deposits in Chile have been found. Remnants of the ophthalmosaurid ichthyosaur. See, that's because they have very large eyes. They came up with this as the genus. They are extremely abundant and well preserved. Extremely abundant and well preserved. There's a total of 46 articulated. That means they're all together. Their bones are all still basically together, and virtually complete specimens, both adults and juveniles. The preservation is excellent and occasionally includes soft tissue and embryos. Say again, these ichthyosaurs are 140 million years old, you say? That obviously it is admitted that they had to be buried extremely rapidly. It's believed that they lost orientation, drowned, and were dragged into the deep sea by turbulent high energy gravity flows, sometimes known as turbidites. Their bodies ended up in the oxygen deficient basin environment where they were immediately embedded by the fine turbidite suspension fallout. You see, as I pointed out, there are so many examples throughout being given by creation geologists of catastrophic burial that the secular paleontologists cannot deny it, and they have to admit that many of these fossils have been subject to immediate burial. Now, they claim that all these ichthyosaurs, as you've seen here, were buried in 75-foot section of repeating turbidite flows. If you look at the geologic section and you measure it on a geologic map, it's about 75 feet of sedimentary turbidite flows. These are underwater rapid flows that bury quickly everything that's within them. And these various ichthyosaurs were found in there, but they say that they were buried over a period of 50 million years. In other words, it's 75 foot, you see, feet of rock, sedimentary rock. They claim it required 50 million years. Now let's think. Why are all these in the same place, having buried rapidly, so rapidly that they're preserved, wonderfully preserved, and yet you're telling me that for 50 million years in the same spot, in the same way, they were buried at the same location over a period of 50 million years. The Lower Cretaceous strata is dated at about 140 million years old. And they say that this section required 50 million years to bury them. Yet they admit that they were each one of these were buried catastrophically and immediately. It doesn't really make much sense. So the fossil captures ancient baby reptiles' birth. Okay, this is another example where the mother was giving birth to triplets underwater. Now they claim this happened 248 million years ago. And we can actually see when you examine this fossil very carefully, you see they have a number of deliveries here by the mother, you might say, fossilized in a snapshot of time. Let's go back to that. They actually have triplets. They could identify three deliveries and identify some of them right here inside the parent, and one of them on the outside, and I think one or two on the outside, and one is still inside the mother's body. Careful examination of the fossil. So again, this is a snapshot in time that was obviously buried immediately during the process of giving birth. Now, we also have a pterosaur graveyard. These are these large flying reptiles. During the so-called age of the reptiles, thousands of bones are mixed together in storm deposits. The fossil pterosaur graveyard is shown here. There are 3 skulls, including a complete female skull within this fossils. These are very delicate bones because this is a flying organism, lightweight bones. We have an incomplete female skull, an incomplete male skull. A major part of the largest articulated forelimb is found. And we've found hundreds of these in this deposit. They were obviously buried very rapidly. Several individuals here, you can see from this photograph, we have the eggs. We see that these eggs were soft when they were buried because they're not all broken and busted up. They're folded in, they were crushed. And when these pterosaurs were buried, the eggs were still very soft. Here's another picture of it. Pliable depressions both have a thin calcareous layer of similar thickness followed by a membrane, okay? The scanning electron microscope of the outer section shows this. This is the outer section. We can still see the pore spaces in the egg, which requires for the embryo to breathe, okay? And then over here, we have, this is the shell, the outer shell, is right here. In other words, I'm showing you that these are so well preserved that with an electron microscope, we could find the shell. And you know the inner membrane of an egg, usually when you're right below the shell, we could see that. And then the interior of the egg. And so we have the shell here, and the membrane, and then the matrix, still all preserved in these eggs in incredible detail, again indicating that this was a very rapid burial of these pterosaurs. Now, there are also billions of large orthocone nautiloids occur within an extremely persistent limestone bed of the Red Wall limestone. This is in the Grand Canyon, okay? These nautiloids are found in the Grand Canyon region of Arizona and Nevada. And there is that this strata, the red wall, is dated at around 300 million years old. See, I'm taking you down through the geologic column and showing you that everywhere we look, there's an indication of catastrophic rapid burial. What is a nautiloid? Well, it's sort of like a squid-type animal that lives in an elongated shell. And it's a straight shell, squid-like marine animals. Sometimes they're over 2 feet long. They're found in the red wall limestone. But here's the thing. Whenever we find these, and they're not just found in Arizona and Nevada, they're found worldwide in various places. Most exhibit a preferred orientation with some remaining vertical, okay? There's estimated that there's billions of these nautiloids in a mass kill event, right, in the Arizona, Nevada area alone. They could estimate that by the number that they find in the strata of the red wall limestone, and they know the aerial extent of that strata, and just multiplying it out, there's an estimate that there were billions that were buried rapidly. Why buried rapidly? Because wherever we see them, they're in an orientation. Can you see that these nautiloids are laid down? This is a photograph that I took at in Tucson at an exhibit of the minerals, the Gem and Mineral Show in Tucson. It was around 1915 when I took this picture, but you could see that they're oriented. What does that mean? This means they were, not only were they buried quickly by the millions, but they were buried by high velocity waters, which are orienting these nautiloids in a particular direction. Now, these weren't from the limestone in Arizona, but they've done studies on these red wall limestone nautiloids, and they are oriented in a particular orientation and direction. In fact, I have one here to show you. Right here. And you can see that even in this small grouping of nautiloids, they are oriented in a particular direction, because wherever we find them around the earth, we see that they were buried rapidly by fast-flowing waters. They didn't just die, fall to the bottom, and are now randomly, in all different directions wherever they fell down and died. This is a mass kill by a rapid burial and preserving them, not only preserving them, but orienting them in a particular direction. Now, we also have crinoid fossils that are believed to be 350 million years old. These are basically sea lilies, which are in existence today. So this is really a living fossil, which we find today. It's a very, it's an animal, a marine animal that filters microbes and stuff from the water and grows. And they're generally called sea lilies, but the more formal name is crinoids. They have stems consisting of little cylinders, stacked one on top of each other. And they're very delicate, and they don't last very long. If these were just fell down on the ocean bottom and they would disintegrate very rapidly. Here's an amazing crinoid with hundreds and hundreds of the little cylinders in the stem still existing. And these were obviously buried very rapidly in order to preserve them today. After death, the head of the creature almost immediately disintegrates. This is what we see from the ones that exist today. So when one finds fossil sea lilies as beautifully preserved as in the photograph above, it indicates very rapid burial of the live creatures at times. And I'll show you in a later program that they're actually pulling out actual chemicals, biologic chemicals out of some of these crinoids today that still exist, original biologic chemicals within them. Here's another example of preservation from top to bottom of the geologic column, supporting the biblical record of the worldwide flood. These are called ostracod. They're a crustacean. They were rapidly buried while incubating the young. We could see that the little embryos are now still preserved at the bottom of these ostracods. Incredible preservation with the fossilized crustaceans incubating its young. The shell, soft parts, and some eggs already hatch during incubation. Incredible preservation for 450 million years. I don't think so. We also have some of the last ones I'll show you, ancient arthropod brains. Now, paleontologists, prior to about, these have been found, I think, about 10 years ago, 15 years at the most, I think. And here's a 2015 reference to this. They were found in fossil beds in China, Shangjiang fossil beds in southwestern China. But the amazing thing about it is what they found in these is that these are down in the Cambrian sediments, dated it down about 500 million years. And it is believed that you cannot preserve brain tissue because it is very soft. And when any organism dies, the brain tissue and nerve tissue is basically the first cells that completely disintegrate, fall apart, become nothing but a mush very quickly, and cannot be preserved and fossilized. That's what they thought. But now we see that we have exceptionally well preserved 520 million year old arthropod brains. It overturns the old idea that nervous tissue does not fossilize, but also overturns the idea that they could possibly be that old. Okay. And here we see that convincing evidence that brains can indeed fossilize. We have here the optic nerves leading from the eyes to the brain that has now been fossilized and preserved. So this is an indication that these arthropods were buried extremely rapidly and preserved, whereby the brain tissue could then be fossilized before it totally disintegrated. Paleontologists, initially they questioned the findings. They argued that they were experimental artifacts. It was just a one-off, an artifact, or that the tissue was fossilized under very rare and special circumstances and likely made it a one-off event. But they've been finding this consistently now for decades now. This is not a one-off event. They found a whole number of these at this point. 7 new specimens, even at the time of this writing, has been found with a scanning electron microscope, reveal brain tissue plus the optic lobes and optic tracts preserved at a flat carbon film, sometimes overlaid with pyrite crystals. So they argued that in order for brain tissue to be fossilized, it must have been buried what? Rapidly in underwater mudslides, in the same way as other exceptionally well-preserved fossils from similar Cambrian deposits. Rapid burial in fine-grained sediments followed by more deposition would have sealed off the fossil bed from scavengers, low oxygen levels, and would have suppressed any microbial activity and prevented the entombed carcasses from the decaying. So like I said, the evidence is so overwhelming that everywhere we look, from the top of the geologic column, the fossil record on down, now we're down here at about 540 million years, okay, supposedly, in theory. But everywhere we look, we see evidence of rapid burial, and yet it is claimed that all these fossils have accumulated over hundreds of millions of years, but the evidence shows that rapid burial everywhere we look. The brain organization closely resembles that of extant insects. Whoa! So the organization of the nervous system is very similar to that of existing insects today. In other words, there's very little evolution indicated here over this so-called period of time. Now, the majority of fossil graveyard environments are representative of a mixture of ecosystems, ladies and gentlemen. They're a mixture of ecosystems. This is not brought up to you. If you go out to Dinosaur National Monument, you see these disarticulated, gigantic bones of dinosaurs all mixed together in here, okay? But what they're not telling you is that a water-laid jumble of disarticulated bones, this is a very high energy environment that tore these animals apart. And found with these fossils is a group of bivalve clams, okay? Why were they deposited in an unlikely place among the land animals? This is not unusual, okay? You're not told this in the museums. That's found with the dinosaurs, and their bones and their fossils are marine organisms, quite often mixed with these terrestrial, that is, land animals. Why is there a mixture of marine organisms and land animals together? What would cause that? Okay. Certainly not animal drifting across the ground, falling over and dying and slowly waiting to be buried. And there are hundreds of thousands of marine creatures were buried with amphibians, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, insects, reptiles in a fossil graveyard in France. There's an area in France. It's a gigantic fossil graveyard, and two paleontologists from the Museum of Natural History in Paris report that the evidence tells a contradictory story. Now, what do they mean by a contradictory story? Come on. It means that these fossils, there's a mixture of all these land animals, okay, with marine animals together. This is a contradiction in uniformitarian idea of a slow burial over time, okay? These animals were mixed together with both ocean organisms and land animals together. There's no contradiction when you understand that this points to a worldwide flood which buried all of these animals. They say this because some of the fossils are marine creatures, some are definitely freshwater dwellers, and some are definitely land creatures. Now, we also have Baltic amber deposits of Northern Europe, okay? Amber is the residue left when trees and break and the sap seeps out, and the sticky sap captures various plants, animals, and insects, and eventually hardens into what we call amber, sometimes used for jewelry. And Herbert Nielsen, he's the director of the Swedish Botanical Institute, described the famous Baltic amber deposits. These are up north of Russia near the Arctic Circle, if I remember right, the location of these. They're enormous amber deposits. And he studied these, and here's what he had to say. Listen to this. It is then quite astounding to find that they belong to all regions of the earth. In other words, these insects and plants that are found trapped in them belong to what? All regions of the earth. The geological and paleobiological facts concerning the layers of amber are impossible to understand. Get this. Look at the wording that Dr. Nielsen is using. Impossible to understand unless the explanation is accepted that they are the result of an allochthonous process, including the whole earth. What does this mean, allochthonous process? That's a geological term, meaning that these fossils were not found in situ, in place, in their natural habitat. An allochthonous process is a process that washes in, brings the organisms, the fossils or the plants, from a distant area, okay? They're not found in their natural environmental place. They were brought in from another area, and it's a result of a washing in, a bringing in of these plants and animals, which includes what? The whole earth. I mean, come on now. Yeah. What kind of a process would bring plants, animals, insects, and encase them in busted up amber trees that have produced amber and captured them, that represent ecosystems of the entire earth? Okay, that is not a local, burial site. And so the only viable explanation is a worldwide flood, which is allochtonously if I could use that word, has brought them and washed them in from areas over the entire Earth. So what do we see in the fossils say? What do they actually say? Okay. Wow, we've been intermingled with all sorts of strange fellows and rapidly buried alive all over the earth. What happened to us? Okay, so we find the rapid evidence. This is evidence. This is scientific evidence. Okay, no one of these evidences, like a CSI investigation lab, can prove conclusively what you're trying to show. But when you put all the evidence together, it leads to a reasonable conclusion that the entire fossil record has been put in place rapidly everywhere that we look. The preservation that we find is cannot be explained by a slow process over millions of years. Now, with that, I would like to go into the sand pipes and folded strata, but I'm not so sure that we really have time to do that. Perhaps I should just conclude it with the fossil record and cover this on a next program. What do you think, Donnie?
What if we went over 2.2? People are really enjoying this, just to get some geology in there, some more geology, and then save any additional points for the third part. But it's up to you, Sal. In terms of 0.2, how long do you think you have
Well,
in terms of information?
to do this, reasonably accurately, I would say a half hour.
Okay. So therefore, maybe it would be a good idea to save the next 2 points for part 3. We are doing an ongoing series, so we don't have to rush through it. And your fossil section was very comprehensive. And so perhaps you wanted to summarize that section and start to wind down, and then we can, for part 3, we'll do points 2 and 3.
Okay.
So,
We'll do that. We'll save this for the next section, which is more directed towards geology of the Earth. Okay, so let me just summarize what we've done here.
as you summarize, there's a question here. We've had a very engaged audience, and Kenneth G here. And the chat is saying that it is a good idea that we save the next major points for a part 3. That way they can review the evidence in detail rather than rush through it. Anyways,
Right.
Kenneth G here says, can you have Sal go back to the fossil bed with mixed animals and plants from different geologies and different eras? Do you remember that specific slide?
Yep.
And some in the audience wanted me to full screen that as well.
Oh, okay. That would be, give me a moment to get to that slide.
Take your time. Perhaps you can reiterate some points there. And
we have 2 areas there that I pointed out. Okay, one was from an extensive bed in France, and is well known, where there is a complete integration, a mixture of all sorts of land animals with marine fossils found. It's the paleontologists there in France say that this evidence tells a contradictory story. So we have that as an example. And then the amber deposits have been extensively researched by Dr. Nielsen. And again, these are a huge area of Baltic amber deposits. It's in north of Russia, near the Arctic Circle. And he says that they belong to all regions of the earth. It is quite astounding that these fossils that are embedded in the amber are a process whereby they were washed in. That's what allochthonous means, a process by which they were washed in to this area where we find them, which includes the ecosystems of the whole earth. So if you want to look that up yourself about the Baltic amber deposits, you'll see there's an innumerable type of insects and plants are found in them. But this is not just at the Baltic amber deposits. This is in general what we find at many, many amber deposits around the world. So we see here the preservation of fossils that we would never expect to be able to last very long if they just, died and floated down to the bottom and waited to be buried slowly.
Excellent slide, Sal.
So Scripture contends that the earth is about 6,000 years old. And in some of my programs and other creation geologists have been pointing out for many, many decades various data sets of evidence, various different types of evidence, which all indicate that the rock record has not taken millions of years to slowly accumulate. But everywhere we look, we see a rapid catastrophic evidence of catastrophic.
Sal, I just wanted to stop you real quick because I wanted to say, feel free to take your time to summarize. I'm going to run to the restroom for a minute before we get into the audience Q&A. So take your time, Sal.
Okay. So the cumulative evidence is pointing to a conclusion which unites all the evidence and therefore leads to a conviction of this premise, okay, beyond a reasonable doubt. In a court of law, when you present evidence for a jury to decide, you are the jury out there, okay? We have been presenting evidence in various programs, various different data sets of evidence, which all point in the same direction. But it's up to you to put the pieces together and decide, have you really been deceived about the age of the earth and the so-called millions of years of biologic evolution, chemical evolution, and evolution of the universe over time? We believe the cumulative evidence is pointing to a conclusion which unifies all the evidence. In a court of law, what a jury has to decide is that there evidence that leads to a conclusion that is beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. Now we've had people say, well, yeah, but there may be one chance in 100 billion that the first cell evolved from chemicals by accident, just like throwing chemicals up in the air for 1 billion years. Sooner or later, they're going to fall back down, and like a puzzle coming together, 1,000 pieces of puzzle coming together by throwing it up in the air. But if I throw it up in the air for 1 billion years, sooner or later, they're all going to come down together. Mathematics shows that that is not possible, that we've shown that on previous programs, no matter how much time you give. But as a jury, you can't make a decision. You can't come to a conclusion based on something that is infinitesimally, remotely possible. No. The jury which is you out there, has to come to something is the conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the conclusion that is would be accepted in a court. Okay, and so we showed you a little bit today from the fossil record. So the Bible contains a chronology of Earth history from creation to the birth of Christ of 4,000 years. This has been calculated by many scholars. As I mentioned, I showed this to some extent in a previous program. The existence of fossils exhibiting numerous examples of incredible preservation throughout the entire geologic column point to a worldwide synchronous rapid catastrophic burial. The common admixture of continental and marine fossils, this is common. This is common. You're never going to see this in a museum. They don't show you this in a museum. The common admixture of continental and marine fossils, often from diverse ecosystems, require inundation and burial by high-energy oceanic floodwaters. Now, we didn't cover this tonight because I didn't want to rush through it, but we will get to it on the next program. We'll show you that the existence of seismically induced injectites in the form of sand pipes and dikes, which penetrate hundreds of feet of sedimentary rock, is more reasonably attributed to rapid deposition of all the enclosing rock formations. In other words, all the geologic column, the sedimentary rocks, we could show you from these having been injected through and penetrated for hundreds and hundreds of feet in all different areas of the world, show that this occurred when these rocks were in a soft condition, not in a hard rock cemented condition as we see them today and all over the world, that they were penetrated at one synchronous time, one particular event in time. And the only reasonable excuse or idea, reasonable mechanism for that kind of a situation worldwide would be a worldwide flood where all these sediments were deposited rapidly. So that we'll concentrate on the next program. Hope you get to tune in, because I have some very interesting things to show you on that from a geology standpoint. So is evolution's deep time on trial? Is the defense of the prehistoric deep time reasonable? Prehistoric. Remember, there are no records of this. Everything below 5,000 years of Earth history, from 5,000 to 500 million, is prehistoric. There are no records of it. You have to examine the evidence for yourself. It's contended that the cumulative evidence is unified and points to an explanatory alternative corresponding to the biblical record. Delusion, illusion. Who is wise? Let him give heed to these things and consider the loving kindness of the Lord. I do have a book that I've published. It's called In the Beginning, God or Dirt. And every person on earth is going to choose. He's going to choose to believe in an eternal God or eternal dirt, one or the other, by default. And you only have one lifetime to get it right. And before you get past even a quarter of this pages of this book, you will have the right answer to get it right. It's available on my website called godordirt.com. You can order it from Amazon. It's not all text. It has 15 illustrations, 2 charts, 18 pictures, 3 tables, and it's an easy read, great to go over with your students, your children, and you could purchase it as an ebook right off the website if you prefer, or you could get a hard copy here from Amazon, and you could get other creation material for all ages, from grade school up to university level. Right here, if you click on these, the answer books, it will take you to the Answers bookstore, one of the largest creation bookstores that you'll find. It will take you right there from my website. So this was presented, thank God, to Donny and his Standing for Truth Ministries, along with us, called New Creation Ministries, at godordirt.com. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Donny. Are you there?
I'm here, brother. As always, excellent presentation, comprehensive, and leaving no stone unturned, which I greatly appreciate. And your points on the nature of the fossil record, all I have to say is the evidence really is incredible. For those who are objective, if you don't believe in the global Genesis flood and you watch this presentation, you will be forced to believe in the global Genesis flood. If you're objective, of course, 2 Peter 3 does warn us that in the last days there's going to be scoffers denying several things: the creation, the global flood, the world that then was being overflowed with water that perished, and the coming judgment. And so some people, unfortunately, are willingly ignorant, but the evidence really is all around us, Sal. And we got some excellent questions. We got questions from myself and also the audience. Now, what I'd like to do, since this presentation was primarily focused on fossils, Sal, and I'm looking forward to your next presentation. You are a fan favorite, brother. So hopefully we can get your next section possibly booked even next month. The sooner the better, I think. And I'm excited for that. And so a major objection, in light of the evidence for catastrophic processes in the past to even form these trillions of fossils in the first place, and the evidence that we have for these massive stretches of sedimentary rock layers that extend over entire continents. We have fossils, marine fossils in landlocked areas that are far from any body of water, all indicating a worldwide flood. They will object to this evidence, and they'll point to the ordering of the fossil record, Sal. And so I'd like us to interact with this objection for a little bit. I have some points and sources as well that I'd like to pull up, but they'll basically argue that, well, what we have in the fossil record, going from the deepest layers to your layers at the top, you have a series, according to them, this is their assertion, although in your presentation you demonstrated a series of mixed environments put there through catastrophic processes. But they'll say what we see is a series of evolutionary history, from simple organisms to more complex organisms. You got bacteria, let's say, at the bottom layers, up to fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and then eventually humans. They'll challenge us by saying, why don't we find dinosaurs, let's say a T-Rex, mixed with a creature like an elephant, a modern mammal? Or why don't we find humans and dinosaurs together? Why does the fossil record, according to them, look like a long history of evolutionary change? And so, Sal, in your opinion, what's the best way to engage that objection put forth by an evolutionist?
Well, I could understand why people would present that as a possible objection because of what you have been not told, what you have not been told, what you have been deceived into thinking about the time factor. Number one, the time factor just isn't there, as we particularly showed in the last session that we did, that the time factor, as supposedly quote unquote proven by radioisotope absolute dating, and we showed that that is a dating game which is totally unreliable. So the time factor is not there. But I could understand why they would think that there is a order in the fossil record, and there is an actual order, but it is nowhere near as complete or in a proper order as is shown in the fancy geologic diagrams, the evolutionary phylogenetic tree, the geologic column, like I showed you, pictures of various fossils up through the record. That order is not as orderly and as regular as presented in these images and
Right.
such. Okay. Now there is somewhat of an order, and that's what we would expect. First of all, the flood was a catastrophic event and a mixing of ecosystems in many areas of both plant, marine, and terrestrial animals together. Right there, I showed you that most of the fossil graveyards are not strictly just all terrestrial animals, land animals, period. They are mixed up with various ecosystems. And we expect that because as the waters rose, and this is shown from a geology standpoint by geologists worldwide, but as the waters rose higher and higher on the earth, they progressively buried the various ecosystems. So, of course, we're going to find the marine organisms at the lowest part or in the earliest sediments to accumulate under the oceans and the water. They were buried first, and they represent 90% of all the fossils on the earth. Okay, and then as the ocean waters rose up, they started to bury progressive ecosystems. First, your marine animals. Okay, then you get to your amphibians near the near shore. They're both water and land animals. Then we start to move up. There is a progression into small mammals and then larger mammals, etc., reptiles, etc. So as these animals try to escape the flood and they're moving to higher ground, the waters kept getting deeper and deeper in successive stages. There were about 7 major stages of in the geologic record where the waters transgressed over the land, receded, and then went back again and transgressed again. There's about 7 cycles of that, which we could trace worldwide. And because of these cycles, and you have the various animals of the different ecosystems trying to escape the waters, they were buried progressively. So there is a somewhat of an order of aggression, but within that, what you're not told is there is this chaotic mixture of land animals and marine animals found all over the earth, as you would expect, because they were inundated by high velocity, high energy waters of the flood. So there is somewhat of a vague order of fossils in the record, but within it is many contradictions or mixtures actually found in the fossil record, as you would expect in the catastrophic conditions. Now, regarding whether you mentioned, well, how about Sal giving us an example of animals buried with the dinosaurs? Okay, how come we don't find all these different animals buried with the dinosaurs? We do. We do. You've been deceived. It has been shown by geologists, creation geologists, not just talked about, an arm wave, photographed, verified, videotaped. All the major museums of the world do not exhibit all the different animals that are found with the dinosaurs. The dinosaur exhibits, when you go to look at it, you see dinosaurs. And that's it. There are hundreds, not a few examples, not 5, not 10, not 50, not even 100. There are hundreds of various plants and animals that are alive and well on the earth today. The same genus and species can be identified buried with the dinosaurs. I mentioned that many of these fossils are a mixture, right, of marine and land animals. But let's talk about the dinosaurs. Within the layers of the dinosaurs, there are in the museums, buried in their treasuries in the back, on their racks and racks are of animals and plants, modern day animals, plants of every kind of variety of trees and plants. I mean, ducks and pigeons and penguins and all kinds of animals buried with the dinosaurs, showing that there is no evolution. Now, if they showed those in the museums, you would look, on the one hand, you'd say, okay, I see the dinosaurs. I see these other animals. If they showed them, well, how come there's no evolution? These dinosaurs are dated here at 100 million years old, but these are modern animals buried with them. There's been no evolution in all of that so-called time. Oh, there's something isn't right here. That's why they don't show it, because you start thinking that the dinosaurs just went extinct. The extinction is not biologic evolution. There are many different types of animals and plants that we see in the fossil record that we no longer have on the earth today. They went extinct, but that has nothing to do with evolution. They couldn't cope with the change in the environment and different conditions, right? But with those are animals and plants that we have today, which exhibit no evolution. And so you're just not going to see them. But I've in the past recommended certain books you could read and see where these plants and animals have been photographed in the museums, but they're not out on display. They're not on display. So there are much contradictory about 15, 20 years ago, or maybe a little more, there was documented about perhaps 500 what they call living fossils. They're fossils that are found deep down and throughout the fossil record, which we find today, the same genus and species basically today living on the earth, indicating no evolution. We've identified in the museums. In my book, I showed you a whole bunch of them that you could find in a museum in Germany. But now, 10, 15 years later, this is not much time. We're now at a point where there's hundreds and hundreds. They're in the thousands thousands of living fossils have been identified in the so-called deep down geologic record, which are identical to what is living today. Even when you go on the Facebook, almost every day there are people showing you fossils that are found in the fossil record, which have shown no evolution because they're alive and well today. And the one example I gave you was the single cell organisms that are so-called found at 3.5 billion years down in the geologic record, but there's been no evolution. We find them today on the surface of the earth in places doing well. And these are stromatolites. They form algal mats in the fossil record, and they are growing in places on the earth today. No evolution for so-called 3.5 billion years of the record.
Wow, Sal, that was an excellent answer. And like you said, a lot of those points you just put forth for our audience, those listening, those are points that they won't be taught in public schools. They're not going to be taught that from...
No, because they're contradictory.
Right.
As those two paleontologists said, well, this fossil record is contradictory. Contradictory to what? To the scenario, to the evolutionary scenario.
Even in children's books, you'll see the age of the dinosaurs, right? My kids, they love dinosaurs. And when you see a dinosaur book or a kid's textbook, the dinosaur section, all you ever see are a representation of dinosaurs, but you don't see. Yeah, and you don't see what you're putting forth
in the museums,
living fossils. Yeah,
in the museums, in the textbooks, in the photographs, in the videos. You go to Jurassic Park, I mean, the movies,
Age of the Reptile.
That's all you see.
And we did a series with Dr. Carl Werner, who has done a lot of study on living fossils. And he pointed out that he's discovered representative examples from all of the major animalphyla living today and all of the major plant divisions living today with dinosaurs, mixed in layers that you don't see represented in museums. And so a lot of people simply don't know about all of even the mammals. You can find living with dinosaurs, mammals that look very similar to squirrels, possums, hedgehogs, beavers, duck-billed platypus.
And why aren't they showing that to you?
It doesn't fit the narrative.
Deception. Let's call a spade, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's deception, because if they showed you and you looked at it in the museum, you would start thinking for yourself, there's something is not right here.
They're not teaching you how to think. They're teaching you what to think. And so if they give an accurate representation of what we actually find in the fossil record, in the geological rock strata, it might get you to second guess the naturalistic theory of origins that's being presented. And I think you nailed it when you said there's a general order that's a reflection of the flood and the rising waters over the year-long flood period, but also a lot of contradictions within there. So it's not as orderly as the evolutionists or proponents of common descent will argue, or what you'll see in the fossil record, where it's just a complete...
Or what they show you
pattern
on the diagrams.
Right.
And the diagrams, what they show you there is like a perfect order. The world, that's not what we find in the fossil record. You could go to Dinosaur National Park and see all these disarticulated, huge dinosaur bones, but in there are clams.
You're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I went to the Sonoran Desert Museum in the Tucson area. I think it was Tucson, Arizona, many years ago. I went with my wife to visit. It's a wonderful outdoor museum. It's called an Outdoor Museum of Natural History. and they had in a case, a glass case there, a fossil that has evolved over time from one living organism to another. Now, I forgot what it was. It was some kind of a, I'm not sure if it was a mammal or some kind of a reptile. I think it was a reptile. They showed you the evolution of this reptile over millions of years in this glass case from one form to another. And I'm looking at that glass case there, and it's, you know, it's all signed up, and this is evolution, and this is how this animal, this reptile has evolved over 1,000,000 years or whatever it was, 2,000,000 years. So, and it had all the transition forms. And I'm looking closely and I go, those are all cast iron. Those are not fossils. You know? I'm not saying Pam, that's my wife. All these transitions, I think it was made out of like cast iron or something, you know. I go, those are not fossils. They're trying to show you the evolution of this creature over 1,000,000 years, and all it is imagination.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have any transition fossils that show a continuous spectrum of evolution anywhere on the earth. There's a few of them, maybe a dozen or so, that have been proposed, and they have one or two of the so-called transitions. Well, it went from here to here. Show me the line of transition in the fossils. Show me, you know, the sequence. Nowhere is there a sequence of transition of any fossil on the earth. The whale fossils are a joke. They've been pointed out. The transition of the whales are an absolute, I mean, it's a tragedy. It's a deception. The transition is a make-believe deception.
We could argue, like you said, over a dozen proposed examples. But if deep time evolution were true, if fish to fisherman evolution was true, there should be no question, no debate. There should be tens of thousands of proposed examples, not just a few that we could argue about all day. I want to see an example of the transition from single cell to multi-cell to fish to amphibian to reptile, then to whale. I want to see that series because that's ultimately what
if it were true, the shelves on the museums and the displays would be overwhelmed with transitions. It would look like the Star Wars programs. I showed a few programs back, you know, all these transitions from the Star Wars, you know. If evolutionary transitions were true, which many of them go into dead ends, so-called dead ends, and the evolution stopped, right? You have all these dead end transitions and such. It should look like Star Wars creatures all over the earth in the fossil record and alive today.
That's right. It's a great point. Evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine that whales and banana plants are related through common ancestry, Sal. And so notice this, right from all throughout the conventional literature, this backs up what you're saying in your fantastic answer there. Notice this, how much of the fossil record is marine organisms? The vast majority, estimated at over 95% of the fossil record, is comprised of marine organisms. And the conditions, right, the factors associated with that is exactly what we would expect from a worldwide flood. But out of curiosity, I was wondering, how complete or incomplete is the fossil record? And what do they say? The fossil record is considered vastly incomplete, with estimates suggesting that only a small percentage, potentially less than 5% of all species are represented. So therefore, Sal, if you could answer this question, aren't guardians of common descent therefore premature in their arguments or challenges to us as creationists? Why does the fossil record show so convincingly to them progressive evolution from fish to fisherman, bacteria to biologist, but yet the fossil record itself is vastly incomplete? To me, this would be like having a puzzle that comprises 1,000 pieces and all you have are 50 pieces. So you have the 50 pieces. Now you're going to guess what the entire picture looks like that comprises 1,000 pieces. There's so much missing data that the conclusions you make based on what the entirety of the puzzle looks like, you're probably going to be wrong because there's going to be a lot of guesswork involved in that. Is that right, Sal?
Yes, that's true to an extent, but what we do find in the fossil record contradicts the evolutionary scenario. The 50 pieces that we do find contradict.
Yeah, good point.
In other words, if you're told that this puzzle, if you had all the pieces, would look like the Mona Lisa at the Louvre in France, but all the pieces you have nothing to do with human beings. The 50 pieces. In other words, it doesn't even make sense. So what we do have, what we can examine of the pieces point to a contrary scenario to millions of years of Earth history.
Yeah, it would be like the 50 pieces you have are pieces of things you'd see in Star Trek, spaceships and that which is futuristic. And then somebody comes along and guesses, well, once we get the full puzzle, this is going to be a picture of, some Western scenario from a couple hundred years ago. It's like, no, they didn't have spaceships back then. So already there's a contradiction. And that's what we see in terms of the puzzle pieces that we do have. So that's a great point, Sal.
Well, also, that's what I tried to point out over the last tonight and in the previous one that we did about a month or two ago, that the idea of evolutionary time is prehistoric, right? It's not even historic. Historic means you have records of it, right? You study history. We can't take Abraham Lincoln and reproduce him in a lab, but we do have a lot of records that could possibly convince you that he was a previous president of the United States. We do have records that you could examine. Now, we can't, by the scientific method, reproduce him and bring him back, right? But we do have historical records. But 99% of everything you're told past 5,000 years, between 5,000 years and 500 million years, is prehistoric. In other words, there's no records. All we have is the evidence to examine. And the evidence says, if you really look at it with an open mind, that the entire fossil record and life itself, all organisms, did not evolve without plan, purpose, or design, did not evolve without plan, purpose, and design. They were designed and created by God, and the record does not show that it occurred randomly over millions of years of Earth history.
Sal, fantastic point. Have a look at this, brother. I think this shows the logical inconsistency of their challenge when they want to be hyper specific. Oh, why don't we find a human with a megalodon? Or why don't we find a human with a mosasaur or something like that? They want to be really specific. A dinosaur with an elephant. Well, here's something that I think is curious and shows how illogical their challenge is. The coelacanth, for example. They say that the coelacanth first appeared in the rock strata, I believe 400 to 420 million years ago in the Devonian. So let's see right here. 400 million years ago. But it's thought to have gone extinct over 65 million years ago. Okay, that's interesting. So they largely think they went extinct. That means, so 400 plus million years, but went extinct 65 million years. That means you have tens of millions of years of fossil representation, if you're going to assume the uniformitarian or actualist timeline, Sal, representation of coelacanth. And then all of a sudden it goes extinct. So there's no fossil representation at all for all that assumed time. But yet today we find coelacanth, an amazing example of a living fossil, swimming around the seas today. Okay, so what does that mean? That means coelacanth, if you're following me, has coexisted with what? With T-Rex, with human beings, with whales. I mean, sometimes you find evolutionists challenging us to say, why don't we find whales with an ichthyosaur? Or why don't we find whales with a mosasaur or megalodon? It's like, well, wait a minute. We don't find whales and coelacanth buried together in the fossil record, but we know that they coexisted because guess what? They exist today in the ocean. So isn't it illogical, therefore, or a weak challenge, Sal, to just point to two random organisms and say, oh, this contradicts creation because we don't find them together. But there's a whole lot of organisms we don't find together, like coelacanth and whales or coelacanth and humans, but yet we know that they existed together because they exist together today. Sal, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, because they're disregarding the fact that various organisms have gone extinct.
Right.
And extinction does not imply evolution. We don't find some of these organisms today on the Earth because they've gone extinct. In fact, the fossil record is much more prolific in the variety of types of organisms than we have on the Earth today. Why is that? Because many of them have gone extinct over a period of time. They couldn't handle the changes in the environment, and so we just don't see those organisms. But in other places, like you said, we do find the same fossils in the deeper, so-called older, deeper layers of the fossil record that are alive and well today, indicating there has been no evolution of those organisms in all this so-called time.
Isn't it funny that because their argument, which is a rescue device, they'll say, well, that creature didn't change for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years because it was just so suited to its environment. It didn't need to change, environmental stasis. But isn't it funny that in all that time with coelacanth, basically looking the same, little bit of variation, you have the evolution of a primate to a monkey, an ape to a human, these massive changes all in the same period of time that something like a coelacanth or a horseshoe crab just stayed the same. I mean, that's pretty wild to think about, isn't it, Sal?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an illogical conclusion that they come to, that organism existed in an environment that hasn't changed for say 200 million years. The environment is constantly changing, and what environment? Where would that be? I mean, the coelacanth's in an ocean today, so
yeah.
You say it hasn't changed, it hasn't evolved. All these organisms that we find that are so-called living organisms, living fossils, were in a perfect environment that never changed. Well,
yeah, and
where would that be?
And what's interesting is we find whales in the ocean today, coelacanth in the oceans today. So they coexist, they have coexisted. But yet if you actually go to the fossil record and you were to make conclusions based on just the fossil record, guess what you don't find together? Whales and coelacanths.
Let me go out on a limb here. I normally don't usually do this on your program. I try to stick with the evidence that has been found, that has been published, that I could show you with references, etc. But let me just talk about some things that I've seen myself over time. Now, there are places in the world where we do find evidence of human beings with dinosaurs, because you hear that all the time. Well, how come we don't find any human fossils with dinosaurs? Well, we do have evidence of human beings with fossils, with dinosaurs. There are human footprints right alongside in the same strata at various places on the Earth right alongside with the footprints of the dinosaurs. Now, I have a replica of one of those in my house, one of those human footprints, replica from the actual fossil footprint found in the same strata with various different kinds of dinosaurs. But these human footprints are found at various places on the earth. I'm not the only one. They've been seen by other geologists and photographed and documented, but you will never see that in the textbooks. They will never tell you about that in the museums. They
Right.
cannot, because it is contradictory to the evolutionary deception. But there are human footprints. Now, let me go one step further. There are actually human remains have been found in the same type of rock strata that we find dinosaurs in. Now, they weren't right next to each other like the fossil human footprints are found right next to some of the dinosaur footprints. But there have been human remains, fossilized remains of humans found in a few places that I'm aware of by competent geologists that I know personally. And he has sent me the pictures of them and the photographs of human remains found in the Morrison Formation in Utah, which is the same formation which we pull out many dinosaur bones from. There are human remains that have been found in the same type of rock strata where we find dinosaurs. And I've seen pictures of them, and I don't want to show you those pictures on here because I haven't myself actually gone there and touched them, but I know I received them from competent geologists that I know of, and there have been found cases of that. My father went to the Museum of Natural History. This was probably, I don't know, my father has passed away now, but I'm going to say when he did this, he was young. He went to the Museum of Natural History in New York and says at that time they had on display what they called an Indian, the remains of an Indian, which is, our native, what we consider a Native American today, but a fossilized human remain that was completely coalified. That means turned to coal. Now, we have fossils that are coalified today, and the coal beds are dated in the 300 million year range. Now, he says when he went to the museum, there was a coalified human person on display, but as long since, who knows where they put it. At the Museum of Natural History. Okay. So there have been human remains found in so-called deep time, ancient strata that go back millions of years, but you're not going to see those in museums and such. And I'll give you one other example. You could take it or leave it for what it's worth. But when I was a teenager, a youngster, I walked in a quarry in New Jersey. I won't mention the name of it. It's a quarry. You could, if I did mention the name, you could look it up by name. A famous quarry in which we found coelacanths. The rocks in the quarry were dated as Triassic, in other words, during the age of the dinosaurs, with a coelacanth. I think it was one of the first finds of this coelacanth fish that they claimed is now extinct, but is alive and well. Okay. So in the same rocks that's dated as during the Triassic, the age of the reptiles with dinosaurs, as when I was a youngster and I walked in there with my brother and his friends, we saw what we were certain were human footprints.
Wow.
And they have since demolished that quarry. They've demolished that quarry. And I went back there about 20 years ago. This picture of me as a geologist, you see on your thumbnail, was taken when I went back to that quarry. What remained of it? There was only about 5% of the rock outcrops of that quarry still in existence. And I went back to see if I could find those human footprints. Now, of course, I had a very, very small chance because 98% of the quarry was gone. But I know, and my brother could attest to that, and his friends, that we saw. Now, we were not paleontologists at the time. We were just young kids, but we could pretty much identify a human footprint. Okay.
Right.
And with our eyes, we saw human footprints in the same rock as dated as during the age of the reptiles, but the quarry is now completely been leveled. I went back to see if by some chance I could possibly find them again, but with 98% of the quarry gone, what I was remaining to examine, I couldn't find anything, but I know that I've seen them.
Right. From personal experience. And wow, that's fascinating evidence right there. And from personal experience. And
I couldn't present it as evidence to you.
Right. But it's a personal anecdote that what you saw.
I know what I saw. My brother knows what he saw. His friend knows. We all said, I remember when we were kids, I still remember it. We looked at it and said, oh my goodness, somebody, some person was walking on these rocks long ago. You know what I mean? They are now in, solid rock. We could see, we say, oh, there's a person was walking here. Well, we didn't know anything about paleontology or geology, but I know that quarry was dated as Triassic rocks.
Wow. Well, there's a place called the Ashley Phosphate Beds, this enormous phosphate graveyard that it's purported to have contained mixed remains of humans with ichthyosaurs, hadrosaurs, plesiosaurs, sharks. And so there's not a whole lot of information out there. So I typically don't use it. But the information that is out there, I haven't really seen a real strong rebuttal to it that showcases all these supposed ancient creatures and extant creatures plus humans mixed together. Just one big giant.
Yes, those fossil beds are on record. The fossils that was contained with them are on records of reports, but you will never see that in a textbook. They never told me that when I was majoring as a geologist to get my master's degree. They never told me that.
I could see the evolutionists using a rescue device like, well, this is an intrusion. Perhaps one of the dinosaur or hadrosaur or plesiosaur fossils intruded into a layer with modern animals somehow due to tectonic shifts, or, they've always got a story, right, Sal? But nonetheless, it's examples like that address their challenge. But then what do? They invoke a rescue device or a story to explain it away.
Right. The human remains that were found in the Morrison Formation by a person I know personally, a geologist. He sent me the photographs and all, and they're found in situ. That means embedded in the rock. They were not remains of people that tunneled down through the rock. In other words, there's no evidence of tunneling in a cave that they died in. They're just as encased in the rock like any other dinosaur bone. They're called in situ. They're in place. No evidence whatsoever examining the whole area around them that these human remains just fell into a crevasse or a hole or something, or in a cave or anything like that. They're just buried in the Morrison Formation like any other dinosaur bone. And they're obviously human remains. There's something like 6 individuals.
Wow. And so if you're going into as an evolutionary scientist, so you have evolutionary based presuppositions and you're looking for various fossils in these fossil graveyards, but you're finding the remains of, let's say, dinosaurs, which they believe are millions of years ago. And so for that reason, couldn't they miss the possibility of finding, a human fossilized phalange or a human fossilized bone? Or even if they do find it, that they either disregard it or say that it got in there by some other means, because they have those presuppositions. So how many have gone ignored or simply thrown into the museum in the basement or something like that because it doesn't fit their narrative, Sal?
Yeah, I'm sure there. If we dig deep enough, we would find examples like that.
Well, this was excellent. This is our clip that's going to be going out on the ordering of the fossils. A geologist dismantles the ordering of the fossil record challenge, Sal. So I appreciate that comprehensive interaction on that point. We definitely need a go-to video out there for when skeptics and critics bring up that challenge. And so this next question I have for you, from your presentation, I think you might be discussing this actually in your next presentation next month, but this is a common challenge. And I've seen it presented, if I remember correctly, on a popular anti-young earth creationist site, Talk Origins. And so they ask this question: how does a worldwide flood account for angular unconformities where one set of layers of sediments have been extensively modified, for example, tilted, and then eroded before a second set of layers were deposited on top? They'll argue, Sal, that this requires at least 2 periods of deposition and therefore a lot of time to allow for deposition, erosion, and then weathering. Sal, what is a good response to that?
Well, it's obviously, when we look at the geologic record, we see not only rapid deposition everywhere we look throughout the record, as I gave some examples tonight, but also at the same time, there was tectonic forces, which are global forces acting on the crust of the earth at the time to disrupt the crust of the earth. So as the layers were laid down, there was also volcanic activity, which is ubiquitous in the geologic record, but there's also tilting of the rocks. There are grabens formed where certain portions of the rock was extended and grabens fallen down, forming part of the basin and range topography of the western United States. So there was much tectonic deformation of the rocks as they were laid down in these stages, and then planed off and leveled off by high velocity flow of water and another set of sediments on top of that. So that's not a problem. We see that in the geologic record. In fact, we see many places on the surface of the earth today called planation surfaces. They used to be called peneplains in the geologic literature. Now they call them planation surfaces. Now, what are those? Those are vast areas, sometimes hundreds of square miles to thousands and thousands of square miles of areas where the surface of the earth is almost flat as a board. Okay. Obviously, the waters that were flowing off the earth back into the oceans near the latter stages of the flood have planed off the rock, just planed it off, and everything that was there was leveled. And below that, some of those places we see tilted rocks. Okay, there are rocks that were previously tilted, and then the flow of water, high energy water, planed the surface right off. And so We get unconformities formed that way, what's called unconformities, and extensive planation surfaces. In the western United States around the Grand Canyon, we have evidence that several thousand feet of rock above the Grand Canyon area was planed off and washed out into the oceans. We have physical evidence on those areas of thousands of feet of rock that have been planed off and washed away, and they're called planation surfaces. And because we find those same rocks that were washed away as you go further north and east, they're in Utah, northern Arizona and Utah. We see those rock layers that are thousands of feet higher, and they've as you go west through Arizona, they've been washed away and planed off, and we see planation surfaces. And where that occurs, whatever is below it is completely shaved off. It doesn't matter what geometry of the rock below it. If the geometry of the rock below it was tilted, it's just completely planed off. And below it, you see the tilted rocks below it.
Wow, excellent answer. So not a problem at all for the global Genesis flood. And wouldn't the Genesis flood year have waves and waves of deposition, erosion? I mean, you could get that in a year's time.
Yeah. There are several major cycles. I think it's 7 of them that we could trace worldwide, where the waters rose, deposited sediments, and then retreated, causing erosion during the retreat, and then another cycle. And so in the geologic record, we could see worldwide, and the Institute of Creation Science has done a tremendous study on this and has documented this worldwide by thousands and thousands of oil wells that have been drilled all over the earth, as well as surface mapping of the surface and examining thousands and thousands of drills, deep well drills, and we could plot these different layers. They're called mega sequences that have expanded over the earth and then retreated and then expanded during the worldwide flood. There was 7 cycles. They could map them in detail. They're mapped very much in detail over 3 or 4 major continents, and now they're working diligently to finish the rest of the continents on the earth.
That's why I'm not convinced. That's why I don't think the old earth creationist local flood theory is plausible, because of many reasons, but one reason being these worldwide mega sequences. Excellent research project by ICR. I think Dr. Tim Clary is running that. And because these require a worldwide cause. Worldwide mega sequences, by definition, require a worldwide cause. So the local flood idea is basically like, well, all of these geologic features is just many local regional floods over millions of years, when no, what you're describing contradicts that. It had to have been all at one time worldwide.
And I have a program that I did for you last year, and you could see it when you go back to my, the section that you have where my programs are saved. What do you call that?
Yep, I've got a playlist, and then also on the website, Stand for Truth Ministries.
A playlist. If you go back to my playlist, I've covered that, how these enormous continental deposits and intercontinental deposits, why they show that they were formed rapidly on a global scale and not slowly over millions of years. When you examine the materials in them, I have a program that I have on the playlist where we covered that last year.
Yes, and if people go to standingfortruthministries.com, search Sal Giardina, and I've got an entire section with all of your past presentations, and then we'll get this one in there too for people to have a marathon of evidence for young Earth creation, the global flood, but also evidence against billions of years, brother. So here's another big one. How could a global flood deposit layered fossil forests? Basically, the skeptical say a global flood in a year, single year, can't account for all these layered fossil forests. You need millions of years, essentially.
Well, I'm not sure I know what you mean by layered fossil forests. We do have layers of coal deposits, extensive coal deposits that go for thousands of square miles. And these were the remains of ripped up vegetation during the worldwide flood that was spread out, ripped up and spread out over the continents between these flood events of the worldwide flood. And then those deposits were compressed. So if you call those fossil forests, you could, because that's essentially what they are. They're deposits of ripped up trees and vegetation that were then further buried by other sediments, compressed, heated somewhat, and turned into coal. So we see that around the earth. I mean, there's no reasonable explanation for these vast coal seams that cover thousands of square miles, and some of them are over 100 feet thick. 100 feet. Some are just 4 or 5 feet, 6 feet, in thickness. But there are some huge coal deposits that are over 100 feet thick that you could trace for, I think, like hundreds and hundreds of miles. So they're layered. If you want to call them layered fossil forests, I guess that would be a good.
I wonder if those that make this argument or present this objection, possibly they're thinking of Specimen Ridge, where you have multiple layers of so-called fossilized forests and then volcanic ash layers that are alternating on top of each other. So I think they're basically saying that this would take time because you need a volcanic eruption to get the ash, and then the forest has to mature. And, this happens over and over again. But you're saying, no, this can happen with the catastrophic processes of the flood?
Right. We've seen that when Mount St. Helens erupted. And we saw in action in real time how an area like Specimen Ridge, where they have so-called layers of fossilized trees standing basically upright,
right,
in a mountain, and they consider that traditionally as various fossil forests have grown over time, over millions of years. Everything is deep time, but at Mount St. Helens, we had a complete illustration in real time of how these vertical trees can be completely ripped up, dragged down by the waters, float, and then turn upright with the roots being more dense than the rest of the tree. So they float upright for the most part. After a while, not all of them, but many of them will turn vertical and then sink down into the volcanic ash and mud. And as the ash and mud is accumulated, they are found in various layers, vertical layers, upright in those deposits, because they become waterlogged. But at Specimen Ridge, we've had creation geologists go over there and look at those things. And those are not buried fossil forests. Those are upright tree trunks that are stripped of all their branches, the bark, the roots are cut off. None of them are sitting in situ, in place, with the root systems down in the ground. The roots have been cut off when they were busted open and then buried upright in the volcanic ash and soils. And again, they're only partial trees. Their branches are gone. Most of the bark is gone. The roots are cut off. They're not forests that are buried in place.
That's an excellent answer, Sal.
So
And
we have evidence that they're not fossil forests,
right,
one
they're
on top of
assuming
the other.
basically they're asserting fossilized forests, even though the evidence or observations in real time would suggest otherwise. But what you're saying in terms of the details of how that would happen makes perfect sense. And we have a real time example with Mount St. Helens, in a way, a small scale example as to how this takes place. Okay, so here's a question. Great job, Sal. From Lynn Mitzi, appreciate it. Did the flood cause the ice age? So the post-flood ice age, the conditions for it, was that because of the flood, Sal?
Well, the flood was essentially responsible for the ice age forming after the flood. So there are in the geologic literature today numerous explanations in published geologic reports trying to explain by uniformitarian long age theory how the ice ages, particularly the Pleistocene ice age, which occurred between about 10,000 to a million and a half years ago, I believe it is dated in the geologic record. The major ice age, that we have seen, that has covered about 30-40% of the Earth's surface. There are numerous reports by geologists, secular geologists, trying to explain what, quote unquote, caused the ice age. None of them make any sense, are scientifically viable. The only viable way to get the accumulation of water in the form of ice up in the northern latitudes of the Earth and the southern latitudes, in other words, high latitudes of the Earth, north and south, to get millions, countless millions of square miles of ice up in those areas, which then the ice accumulated and flowed down to a little bit somewhat lower latitudes. The only way to get all that water up there is not by the cooling of the Earth. That's not going to do it. The Earth did not go through a cooling system to form that. But after the flood, the warm waters of the flood, which came up from the lower lithosphere of the Earth, as it says in the Bible, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the waters were extruded out onto the Earth. That water, warm ocean water, which covered the Earth after the flood, evaporated. They've had studies of that, and that evaporation eventually, due to the global circulation today that we have of the atmosphere from the equator up to the poles, we have a global circulation today from the equator up to the poles, and then the cold air comes back down. That's why we get these cold fronts coming down from the north, and that excessive evaporation of the warm waters is what brought the water up into the northern latitudes, where it snowed, it became frozen and accumulated in enormous quantities and formed the ice age. That, along with all the volcanic activity that occurred during the worldwide flood, which we see in the geologic record. We see volcanic activity on a scale which are many times, many orders of magnitude of anything we have today. And the enormous volcanic activity which we find in the geologic record put those aerosols in the air and caused the summers to be cooler, so that the ice that formed in the northern latitudes didn't have a chance to melt in the summer. because of all the obstruction in the air. The air was polluted with particulate matter from the volcanic activity for several hundred years. And so it kept that ice from melting in the summer and the moving towards the northern latitudes from the warm oceans and precipitating. So the only reasonable way to form the ice age is through the result of the worldwide flood, covering the earth with warm water.
That's a great answer on the ice age. And you'll hear critics ask the question, well, what about valleys that formed through glacial erosion? They say that's a very slow process. But would this rapid post-flood ice age largely answer that question, Sal?
Yeah, there are many valleys. You know, the ice sheets extended down in the northern hemisphere. The ice sheets, the major glacial ice sheets, extended down as far as into the northern United States, and that roughly in that area. We know where the boundary is because we could see it by the terminal moraines, the material left at the terminus of the ice sheets. We could plot that right across the country everywhere. But below that, and further south, you had a valley glaciers formed in the mountains where there were high mountains because it was very cold. And as I said, in the summer, ice was inhibited from melting like it would today. Initially, it was very cold due to all the volcanic ash in the air for hundreds of years. We had glacial valley ice, mountain glaciers formed. And those ice from those mountain glaciers, as we see today on the earth, we still have many mountain areas where we have glaciers coming down the mountains. I mean, you can go to Alaska and various areas and see them today. My wife and I went hiking on a glacier, you know, it was about 5-6 years ago. And unfortunately, my wife fell down on the ice. Very dangerous thing to do. Not a good idea for a vacation.
I'm glad she's okay, brother.
But my only point is that we have mountain glaciers today that are in existence, and they're still they're usually, most of them, I believe, are retreating today, but they formed in the past at various areas where you had high mountains, you know, and gouging out these valleys, these glaciated valleys. And we could map those and everything, and we could see them.
So skeptics will oftentimes ask, how, you mentioned mountains, how are valleys formed, but also how are mountains formed? Because for the uplifting to take place of the rock strata would require slow processes, millions of years. But in light of what you've conveyed on the nature of the flood, were mountains largely rapidly uplifted through catastrophic processes during the flood, Sal? Or what's the best way to engage that basic question? How do young earth creationists explain mountain formation?
Well, some of the mountains were formed during the flood due to these tectonic mountain moving processes, like the Appalachian Mountains in the east, and where I now live. I've now moved to North Carolina. I live in the Appalachian Mountains now, and and the Appalachian Mountains were formed by the continents coming together and compressing those sediments, thousands of feet of sediments, compressing them into wavy mountains, anticlines and synclines, gigantic mountains of undulating sediments, and then the waters retreated and planed off a lot of them, but we still have left today the Appalachian Mountains are just a bunch of mountains that go up and down and up and down that have been planed off. And if you map those, you could see all those anticlines and synclines. And so many of the mountains were formed during the flood, but also after the flood, there was still a number of tectonic forces working on the lithosphere of the earth, that is the upper crust of the earth, to compress the mountains in places and lift them up. And in other places, they were pulled apart and they dropped down in the basin and range area. So there's different forces acting during the latter part of the flood and for some time thereafter. But
Sal,
the indication is that those mountain ranges were deformed when they were in a soft sediment state. They didn't have time yet to become indurated or hardened into rock. So most of the deformed rock indicates that they were deformed while they were still in a soft state.
You're an encyclopedia worth of information, Sal. And so a follow-up from those that reject a worldwide flood, they'll say, well, the relative ages of mountains suggest that they're forming over millions of years, because if you compare, let's say, they'll say, why weren't the Sierra Nevadas eroded as much as the Appalachians during the flood? And so the differences in what we see, I think they're trying to assert, means that it all had to occur at different times. Does that make sense, Sal? And what would be a good way to engage that?
Yeah, not all the mountain ranges were formed instantaneously, so to speak, at the same time. Some were formed during the latter stages of the flood. That's what caused the water to flow off into the oceans. The Bible says the mountains rose in the valleys. Many of the valleys sank down, right, and thus that allowed the waters to flow off of the earth into the ocean basins today. Now, some of them were formed during the flood, probably around the early stages of the flood, the middle stages. And then after the flood, there was still some tectonic activity, I think, forming some of the mountain ranges. So they weren't all formed exactly at the same time, but in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, a lot of these arguments or challenges that I see consistently employed, they could fall in line with a straw man fallacy. I mean, like you said, what explains that specific challenge would be mountains forming at different times, still in a short amount of time, but not all at the exact same time. Early in the flood, late in the flood, and then also after the flood.
Yeah, because there are different mechanisms that form the mountains. Some were from the collision of continents. Some were from subduction of the continents. One lithospheric plate subducting underneath the other continent. Some were formed from the subducting plates, heating and forming volcanic activity up through the lithosphere, forming volcanic mountains. Others, like the Colorado Plateau, you have thousands, tens of thousands of square miles completely lifted up in the western United States, called the Colorado Plateau. The entire plateau is basically lifted up without much deformation to it at all. And that's called the Colorado Plateau. We believe that was lifted up when this Pacific plate subducted underneath the continental plate and causing forces that lifted up the Colorado Plateau. And if you drive in the western United States, in Arizona, Utah and stuff, you're at a certain elevation. Say you're at like 1,200, 13 to 1,500 feet. You're driving for hours. Then all of a sudden you come up to the Colorado Plateau. It goes up to 7,000 feet. You got to wind your way up the road, to go up. And when you're up on it, on the Colorado Plateau, you're at 7,000 feet. So that's another type of mountain range,
Yeah.
So there are different kinds of mountain ranges in the world.
Okay, so in light of what you're saying, wouldn't a lot of this mountain formation anyways require these catastrophic plate tectonics basically during the flood? Because to get that necessary force to rapidly buckle the rock strata to uplift to form these mountains, you'd kind of require these plates coming at each other at meters per second speeds. I think a good analogy or illustration, if you compare it to two cars coming at each other at a kilometer an hour, there's not going to be much in terms of effects if they crash into each other. But if you had two cars coming at each other at 100 kilometers an hour, well, there's going to be some devastation there. And so is that akin to what we see in terms of mountain formation, that you would kind of need these plates coming at each other at meters per second movement, Sal?
Yeah, in the 1960s or so, the idea of plate tectonics, the movement of large, massive plates around the surface of the Earth, became quite in vogue and very popular to try to explain many of the features of the Earth that we see today. The idea that the continents drifted apart is true, but there's also the idea that some of the continents collided together, like produced the Indian continent colliding with Asia, producing the Himalaya mountains, etc. And the idea of plate tectonics became, helped to explain a lot of the features of the Earth. The only difference is the secular scientists have to add their millions of years of Earth history, explaining that this was a slow process over billions of years. But the field mapping of these and examination of the rocks, which occurred to some extent. I covered that one or two sessions back, the folding of the rocks in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
That all over the Earth, almost everywhere we look, we see that these folds and distortions, disruption of the rocks and producing of the mountains, especially the folded rock mountains, was produced when those rocks were soft, in a soft sediment situation rapidly. So the only place we differ from secular geologists is we don't disagree in plate tectonic movements all over the Earth. We see it today. We can map these movements today. A lot of them are causing earthquakes at various places. But it's the speed. So we believe that during the worldwide flood, these plate movements were very rapid and distorted the Earth's crust in different places, forming different mountain ranges. But the secular geologists still claim that most of the mountain ranges were formed slowly from these movements, from these plate movements, but over millions of years. And they could prove that because of radioisotope dating of the rocks in those areas, of course, are absolute dates. And they date these rocks as millions, hundreds of millions of years old. But we showed that this is just a dating game, and they select the dates that they want that fall in line with their preconceived idea of the evolutionary biostratigraphic date that they want to fall into the Darwinian evolution scheme of things. Then they accept the radioisotope date.
Is the reason why, and before I ask this question, just to the audience, I put out 2 videos, separate videos since our last show together, Sal, on radiometric dating. And they've accumulated a lot of views. They've been very helpful to people. And so people can check that out. It features yourself and me, of course. The one on C14 on how that demolishes an old Earth, and then one on radiometric dating in general, where you and I interact on that topic for quite a while, about 25, 30 minutes. So I recommend people check that out. But what I wanted to ask, based on what you're saying, so is the reason why these sediments had to be soft in terms of folded mountains and bent rocks? Because if that were to happen when they're hard, they would break or crack. But if it happens when they're soft and then hardens, which could happen, is that why, Sal? If you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we know that if you go out to your sidewalk out there, your concrete sidewalk, you get a bulldozer, two bulldozers on either end pushing on it. Is it going to buckle and fold? No, it's going to bust all up. You can't bend and deform hard rock into tight folded sequences of rock without it disintegrating and busting up. Everybody knows that. That's just kind of common sense. Rock is not ductile enough. It isn't pliable enough. But the evolutionists say those rocks, the reason why they're deformed, and they were deformed due to the high temperature and pressures, they were buried while they were being deformed. They were buried deeply in the crust of the earth, and the temperatures and pressures that were applied to them over millions of years slowly metamorphosed the rocks. Metamorphose means they're rocks that change their composition from the original clastic detritus that they accumulated as erosion products of water. They were deformed chemically due to heat and pressure, and they were metamorphosed. Now, are there metamorphic rocks on the earth? Yes, they cover extensive areas. There are rocks that have been deformed under temperatures and pressures we see all the time as geologists. But the question is that, or these folded rocks in many places where we could examine them, are they metamorphic rocks? Were they folded under temperature and pressure? Now we could change. We know the difference between a sedimentary rock that is cemented together by residual chemicals after the water drains from them, and a metamorphic rock which has been deformed under temperature and pressure. Geologists are trained to recognize those kind of differences. You could usually see it even just by walking up to the rock formation, whether it's a metamorphic rock or a sedimentary rock. But if you can't tell visually under the microscope and stuff, there's 100 telltale signs which tell whether the minerals were deformed under temperature and pressure, forming new minerals and new cementation, etc. And many places where we see these folded rocks, they were not metamorphic rocks. They were not metamorphosed. They're still sandstones and shales and mudstones in their sedimentary state. They are not, yet they are folded, see? So they were folded when they were soft. The folding did not occur under high temperature and pressure conditions over millions of years and change them into metamorphic rocks. They're still sedimentary rocks. There's no evidence that they were deformed under high temperatures and pressures in many cases. Now, there are some cases where they were, but in many cases, we could see that those rocks were formed, folded when they were rapidly, when they were soft sediments.
Wow. Such fascinating information. Sal, again, to the audience, if you did not believe in the global Genesis flood before you watch this program and several of the other programs we've done, this isn't our first time discussing the global flood, you will be a believer if you're objective after this. And so basically we find these dramatically folded masses of rock layers all over the planet. Had to have happened rapidly while they're soft, because if you were strong enough to bend a rock, a hard rock, you'd break it. And so, yeah, I mean, that right there is an excellent piece of evidence for a worldwide flood, Sal. And so, okay, as usual, my brother, time flies by with you. And so I do want to get these last one or two questions in, and then we'll start winding things down. Sal, as is typical with your programs, this has been another comprehensive one. And so I do want to encourage those in our live audience and those that watch this in the future, make sure to share this around on your social media platforms, Facebook, pass it to your friends and your family, because it's 2025 and it really is an amazing time to be a biblical creationist, as Sal is proving. And so Bread of Life has a question here, and I'm not sure I've specifically heard of this objection. So this is interesting. She says, how do you respond to the objection that we don't have enough time in young earth creation for the formation of black sand on igneous rock beaches? Any thoughts on that, Sal?
I have to think about what they're asking. Black sand on igneous rock beaches. Well, I imagine if you have a beach that is eroding away basic igneous rocks, that is, igneous rocks mean the rocks that were formed, they were a melt at one time, like lava flows and such, or volcanic rocks. As they erode, they can form, I guess, black sand. I haven't really heard of beaches of black sand. I imagine there is some areas where there's black sand mixed with the beach sand. I don't know what you mean by there's not enough time. I know that the beaches are eroding today. Current beaches are eroding very quickly. And that's a whole program in itself, which I showed about a year ago here. It's on my playlist. But the beaches are being eroded very, very rapidly. If they were being eroded for millions of years, I mean, the beaches would have eroded back for hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of miles back from where they are now. So the beaches don't indicate that they've been eroding for millions of years, because the erosion is fairly rapid that we measure today. But I don't know how this relates to this black sand that you're talking about. I don't know.
Well, that's good. I appreciate that, Sal, interacting with that. And the last one we have here comes in from Lorraine. Appreciate it. Another common challenge dealing with limestone. And so Lorraine is asking, how was limestone from a biological origin formed rapidly and in a flood condition when you need specific pH conditions? Before you answer it, Sal, just to kind of lay the foundation and define limestone in general, is it correct to say that there's a couple different types of limestone? You got chemical limestone, formed through the precipitation of calcium carbonate, basically minerals in the water. And then you've got fossiliferous limestone, which is a type of limestone that's formed through the accumulation of remains of dead organisms, many thousands, millions of dead organisms forming it. And so would there therefore be two separate explanations for the different kinds of limestone? If you could maybe expand or correct any of that, Sal?
Yeah, the pH and the chemical conditions forming limestone to precipitate out of water. I don't remember all the specifics. There's quite a bit of information in the creation literature and other literature about how limestone forms, but you need certain temperature and pH conditions to have calcium carbonate precipitate out of the water. And so under the conditions of the flood, we feel that those warm waters extruding from the earth, the foundations of the deep, bursting open and delivering warm waters all over the world, as we see evidence from today in the oceans. We have very hot waters emanating from fissures down in the ocean. And of course, we have the major ocean ridges of the Earth going all around the Earth below the oceans today that have no doubt produced a lot of warm water in the past. So the formation of limestone, the conditions, the temperature and pH must have been just right to have a lot of calcium carbonate precipitate out of the water and form what we call chemical limestones. We have vast deposits of those. But like you said, Donnie, we have also limestones formed from countless billions of fragments of organisms, shelled organisms. These shelled organisms produce mostly a limestone, a calcium carbonate exoskeleton, shells and such, that are usually, I believe, when they disintegrate, they're aragonite. They're a different form of calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate can come in two structures. One is just regular limestone structure, chemical structure, and aragonite is a different form of calcium carbonate. The molecular form of it is if you examine it under a microscope, it's a different type of shape. And so we have limestones that consist of countless billions and billions of broken fabrics of shelled organisms in it. We find that over vast areas of the country. Like if you go to the Grand Canyon and you walk on top of the Kaibab limestone, it's all filled up with innumerable pieces and fragments of shelled organisms. So that was due to the catastrophic nature of the worldwide flood, just busting up and burying, marine organisms and forming those kind of limestones.
Right. Wouldn't the catastrophic nature of the flood combined with the openings of the fountains of the great deep provide the millions of marine organisms and also the chemicals necessary to form both kinds of limestone, fossiliferous and the chemical limestone?
They're called clastic limestones. They're fragments of all busted up, shells of creatures, and also busted up reefs, oceanic reefs that were all busted up and fragmented and everything. So the conditions apparently formed that. Now, obviously, it was due to a worldwide flood because these deposits are enormous.
Right.
They cover vast areas all over the country and sometimes extend internationally into other continents. So whatever happened on a global scale.
Yeah, I can't remember all the details to be exact, but we had a flood boundaries conference, and John Mackay, who's another creationist geologist, he did a presentation on the flume experiments that they've done in Australia, showing sedimentary layers forming rapidly in real time. It's amazing, really. And then also their fossil tanks. And so if I remember correctly, he described limestone being formed rapidly in real time in his fossil tanks. So basically, in other words, everything that, for the most part, that the critics of a global flood, Sal, say require millions of years to form, we actually have real-time experiments in fossil tanks and flume experiments where they can form rapidly.
Right. You just need the right chemical conditions. And apparently we had them during the flood.
Yeah. I like to say it's not time, it's a process. If you got the right conditions, factors, and processes, you don't need millions of years. So, Sal, this was a marathon. I appreciate your endurance. And my brother, you look like you're ready for another 3 hours, but we're going to give you the rest of the night off. I'm already pumped for part 3 of this ongoing series. So you and I, my brother, will chat sometime soon, and we'll get that in the schedule, as I know our audience, because we've been going for over 3 hours and we still got over 50 in our live chat. And, you know, we got endless questions. We'll save more questions for our next show. And so, Sal, God bless you. I appreciate another comprehensive, thought-provoking program on the flood and refuting billions of years. Let's hand it to you in case you had any final words, final thoughts, basically anything you'd like to leave us with as we wrap up tonight's program, Sal.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we traditionally been told that, you know, modern science negates and contradicts the scripture, the biblical record, but it really doesn't. When you examine the evidence, we see that the evidence conforms to the biblical record, and the timeline of Earth history of 6,000 years as God has preserved in His Word. And the deception out there is to just simply get people to think that they're their own gods. They were they weren't created in the image and likeness of God, but they were just accidentally an accumulation of chemicals over a period of time. And now you and I watching this program is the culmination of millions of years of random accidental combination of elements. And the thinking human beings that you are out there has formed by accident. But we know from science that that is not possible. Even the simplest cell, living cell, operating cell, cannot form by accident over millions of years. The discovery of DNA and its operation in every living cell has undoubtedly shown that, and that life is a product of a creator who wants to have a relationship with you, and you just need to go beyond this deception of deep time and natural processes forming life itself over millions of years.
Amen. Excellent final words. So important, Sal. People need to go beyond the deception of evolution's deep time. We're not, as humans, related to whales, banana plants, and all other forms of life. The earth is not billions of years old. And yes, the Bible's account of origins and the worldwide flood, they're true. And they're confirmed by overwhelmingly by the scientific data, Sal, as you've demonstrated, not only in this program, but in so many of our past programs, which I do want to encourage those in the audience to make sure to check out. Have a marathon. So many good programs we've done together, Sal and I. He always gives a comprehensive presentation, and then we do quite a bit of discussion, and we take your live audience questions. And so God bless you all. I appreciate all the engagement, all the support, and also the feedback. Sal, appreciate your time and also your endurance, brother. You always impress me in terms of how well-rounded you are on these topics. And I know some of these questions can be technical and detailed, and you always do a fantastic job answering them for us. And so, Sal, God bless you. God bless you all in our live chat. Appreciate you tuning in, and Standing for Truth is out. We'll see you all again soon.